Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I haven't done this kind of video before, so I'm going to do a reaction video on the Linus Tech Tips Linux challenge that they're doing, primarily due to the comments and various threads that relate to this challenge and video from him. Knowing the Linux community and how it is, I feel like that there are some points made in this, and so we're going to go through this video. I'm going to pick it up at choice parts and kind of give you my thoughts on this, because there's definitely some valid points that are brought up by Linus and Luke. At the same time, just for clarity's sake, I am a Linux user, but I also do use Mac as well. I used to use Windows. My gaming computer has moved full-time over to Linux. So I am a Linux evangelist, but I'm not a purist. So I like to take things from a healthy dose of consumerism and developer side of things as well, because it is essentially the consumer side of industries that tend to fuel innovation and growth in these areas, and that's where I really want Linux to go. So I'm going to approach this video from that perspective so that everyone watching knows where I am on this. I'm going to play this forward now, and then I'll stop it at different points and leave my feedback on those parts, and hopefully you enjoy this.
Death to Microsoft! Your tyrannical reign over PC gamers is at an end! Freedom! Is what I would say if I lived with Linus Wallace III over here in Fantasyland, where any of that was true. So far, the 1-month Linux Gaming Challenge has been as advertised, a challenge. And in part 2, Luke and I are going to be taking it to the next level by not just gaming on Linux, but by recording and streaming our gameplay to viewers on Twitch. Now, I'd be lying if I said I'm not expecting some speed bumps.
So what I am going to say about this part is that the expectation of the speed bumps, it's valid. It's Linux has a reputation for that. It's not as smooth as a lot of us, and myself included, would like to say, but entering into something with speed bumps is, I think, healthy. So having a kind of dose of skepticism and optimism at the same time, and I think Linus is genuine in both sides here. He wants this to work. You know, I think it's realistic to expect speed bumps, especially when switching over to an operating system that, from a consumer perspective, so we're not talking the servers, we're talking consumer perspective, has a very low install base.
With our desktop environment set up, Luke and I have a deceptively short pre-flight checklist of tasks to complete to be streaming ready. We'll need comms to chat and collaborate with our fellow creators, and software that's capable of capturing our gameplay, audio, and face cams.
And no points will be awarded for having an ugly or bad sounding stream.
Immediately, I started overthinking things. Sometimes that's the problem with knowing just enough to be dangerous. I tried to apt-get OBS.
Yeah, I can see the issue here, and this is not, I want to say this is like a rookie mistake for a Linux user, but if you're used to Linux, then of course you know that this is a mistake. However, whether we like it or not, Arch-based distributions like Manjaro, and I know there's some weird thing on threads about that, but the fact is that Arch does not have apt install as a default, as a package manager. It is for Ubuntu and Debian-based systems. If you go online and you type in how to install Streamlabs or whatever, and then type in Linux after, which, let's face it, lots of people will do, they might not type in this specific distribution because people are not used to that. They're probably going to get a website that is pretty much going to recommend Debian, Ubuntu-based installation commands like apt, or they're going to get Fedora, Red Hat-based distributions. It's not that often, sadly to say, to find Arch-based instructions on a lot of websites, and that's just kind of a fact. I don't think this is a mistake that only Linus will make. Remember, he's an experienced tech user, so you have to imagine that if he makes this mistake, then you must assume that a lot of others will make this mistake too.
The industry standard for desktop capture and streaming in the terminal, only to discover that Manjaro, the Linux distribution that I'm using, doesn't come with apt because apt is for managing packages on Debian and related OSs.
Also, I think that this is kind of one of those issues where if you don't, to use the terminal to install something, if you're used to Linux, it's fine, but it's not fine for consumers. It just isn't. I'll get slack for that, but it's not a solution to stuff. There is a GUI-based package manager in Manjaro. I don't know why he didn't load that up directly. To open up the terminal to install a program, it's not for 2021 if you're aiming at consumers. You can do it that way, yes. But should new people do it that way? No. If they want to get more into Linux, then they can learn it. But for consumers, you don't really want to aim that way. I don't know if Linus is entirely expecting to kind of recommend this to consumers, or whether he's trying it out to be like, okay, I want this to be for myself, in which case it might work for him to use the terminal. From my perspective, on my evangelism of Linux, I basically try to focus on consumers and making it as easy as possible. Therefore, terminal commands and terminal installations are completely out of the question, because that's not something that I think a lot of people can do or should do. I want to use it as an opportunity to improve the interface in Linux if possible.
Speaking of which, I had a panic moment when I checked OBS compatibility and found out that it is actually unsupported in Arch, by the way, and its derivatives. Side note here, I always kind of assumed that the Linux community was grousing about NVIDIA primarily for their locked down proprietary approach to things, and that it had less to do with the actual quality of the product. Now, I properly understand that it is definitely both. As mentioned, core product functionality from like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, see, like NVIDIA XO settings, this software control panel looks like dog shit, it behaves like dog shit. I mean, really, this is a sad excuse of a program by a company like that. This is where Linus had an NVIDIA card, so he used an NVIDIA-based setup, so that's fine. But if he had an AMD card, this would be a lot smoother in most cases. I have Manjaro, I have an AMD 5700 XT, I haven't installed anything else on top. It's just been absolutely rock solid for me, the performance of the graphics card. This is one of those issues where, as I probably already mentioned about first party support, if I haven't, this is going to be a reoccurring thing. I can definitely tell first party drivers, first party support, that is what Linux absolutely needs, desperately needs. We can see progress in this area. NVIDIA needs to really get off their ass with this and do something better. AMD also actually need to also do more work on the software side of things, but at least the drivers are baked into the kernel. They're very stable. They work well. I'm very happy with them. A lot of people are very happy with them. So yeah, this program is, oh my god, what the hell is this?
It's just obvious that the Linux software has never gotten the kind of TLC from the UX team that the Windows software does.
That's pretty much the case with most software, I think. There are lots of good software for Linux. There's some really good software there. There's also lots of software that could be good, but the interface absolutely sucks because it's designed by programmers and developers who are really good programmers and developers. But user experience, user design, it's like you need to look at it from a different perspective. I feel like, again, this is one of those, the company should get behind the hardware and the software a little bit better.
For me, acquiring OBS was no problem. I just got it from the package manager and it was all okay.
This is the correct way, right? If you're going to switch over to something, sure, you can use the terminal, but opening up, Luke knows this, but opening up the package manager, a visual interface, this is what people will want to see if they're going to switch to Linux from Windows and they're just basically gaming and streaming and doing general productivity stuff. This is what you'll want to use.
Once installed, though, we noticed something. Window capture on Linux can be a little problematic. We couldn't seem to get it working at all at the start, but a few days later I tried it again for a different project and it worked just fine. I checked in with Linus and his did too. Neither of us know what might have fixed it, but that's cool, I guess.
I mean, this is one of those weird things where I know that the community is pretty big on, oh, you don't need to restart Linux and it'll be fine. I don't know who these people are, but that's just not the case. You need to restart in some cases, especially if you're talking about interfacing with hardware, you tend to need to restart. And I think that probably their problem was fixed by a restart, I would have to guess.
The bigger issue for me ended up being the software that just doesn't exist. But if your peripherals have a manufacturer-provided tool that is used to reconfigure RGB lighting, or the lift-off distance of your mouse, or the sensitivity steps of your DPI button, then get ready to install Windows in a virtual machine, pass those devices through, configure them, and then hand them back over to Linux. It's extremely tedious.
This is definitely true. There are open source versions of the program written by the community. You guys are awesome. In some cases, it's just not the same as the first party developed software, and that's to be expected. I have peripherals that, I can control the lighting on my Razer mouse pad and on the keyboard, control the RGB with Open Razer, works really great. Headset, cannot control. Stream Deck, Elgato really could do a lot of good work here, but the open source community built versions of Stream Deck, I love that it exists. It's a little clunky, it doesn't have all the features. That's not a fault of the community though, that's a problem for Elgato. I'm glad that it exists, but it's not a replacement. And it's not a deal breaker for me, I can use it. But this is a common problem, and if it doesn't exist, like with this headset for example, the only way to alter the settings of this headset is with a Windows machine. And that is, again, not the Linux community's fault. That is Razer's fault. I guess my hope with this video from Linus is pretty much going to shame some of these companies into like putting the finger out and start doing a little bit of work on the Linux part, because there's a ton of people there waiting for them. And it would be very well received in lots of cases, just like when AMD got in there a little bit with the drivers and stuff like that. It was a big welcome move. This is where we want to push things forward if we want consumer level support for drivers and hardware.
It's even worse for my audio interface. The Go XLR has a handful of unique features. The bad news about it is that, as far as I can tell, TC Helicon has given exactly zero thought to Linux whatsoever. But wait!
I mean, that's pretty much the case with most companies who are making stuff. They don't really care about the Linux community. We can barely get them to care about the Mac community, let alone the Linux community. There's even less consumer base on that. My mouse, Logitech Wireless, works great. I get a battery indicator, the operating system, I get notifications that the battery is low.
There's a solution. All I have to do is follow these simple instructions to download a random script off GitHub and run it. Even the process of downloading it was unintuitive. And I know GitHub is for developers and not for end users, but it's really hard to hide behind that shield when it took me less than 2 days to run into a situation where I had to use it. I mean, at that point, if GitHub is only for developers, then desktop Linux is only for developers. You can't.
I mean, this is it's true. I have to support him on this. This is used as a shield. But at the same time, I'm also going to kind of go on the other side of the fence with this and also say that GitHub primarily aimed at developers and built for developers, but it's become a very useful platform for this kind of software sharing, where people just go, do you know what, we'll just put our project on GitHub. We're not going to put it on a separate website to download exe files and various setup files. We'll just put it on GitHub. I feel like this is a little bit of a problem. GitHub's interface is a little weird, let's be honest. The way that you can't just download stuff like the normal way. But if you're a developer and you know how to use it, it's fine. At the same time, Linux users also need to accept that if the solutions are, oh, well, there's this project on GitHub, you can use that to then replace something that you had on Windows, then you have to expect that people use GitHub and not say that they shouldn't because it's only for developers, because lots of the software is there. Definitely, this is one of those areas that could be improved, because with the correct programming and a good user interface design, we could try to have something that you could build directly from GitHub. Those exist already, but that needs to be smoother for consumer users, and then this wouldn't probably be much of an issue. Linus is right here. If you're going to defend that GitHub is only for developers, then desktop Linux is only for developers if you need GitHub to get stuff to work. If you don't need GitHub to get stuff to work, then Linux desktop is fine.
Anyway, I found a guide on how to run a script. I'm grateful for that, but I'm frustrated by the condescending tone. I mean, my assumption that a file with a .sh extension would behave as I would expect it to and launch in some kind of script running application doesn't seem that unreasonable. Newsflash, random contributor, you can also change a file extension in Windows, and it will attempt to launch in the default program for that file type. It actually serves exactly the same fundamental purpose, hinting at the contents of the file. The only difference is that these hints for the user are also used as hints for the operating system. It's actually a lot more convenient than digging into the properties of the file to find out what it does.
This is one of those cases where it's doing what it's intended to do. Just because a file and Windows or Linux or whatever, any other operating system, just because it has exe at the end or JPEG or .txt does not necessarily mean that the contents of the file is that, right? Linux is behaving the way that it is designed because it's looking for something more than just the extension. Windows, I mean, you can change an exe file to .txt, and when you open it up, it will just be a bunch of gobbledygook code because it's not. Should consumer users be editing the ends of like files like that, even in Windows? Personally, I don't think so, because that would indicate that something along that line doesn't work. So you need to change something that someone else done to make it work. So I see like a user experience issue there. Again, at the start of the video, I'm focusing from a consumer perspective. So you want people to download something, and boom, it should work. You shouldn't have to right-click, open, rename, and edit the extension of a file on Windows, on Linux, on Mac, anywhere, in my opinion.
Anyway, pompous tone aside, that contributor did help me figure out my GitHub download. It spat out a bunch of errors, and as I expected, most of the buttons don't work, but all the inputs and outputs that I had already configured in Windows did show up. My faders work. I even have my button.
I think that the solution, there was some comments about this particular point. I'm going to come to Linus's defense on this because you can say there are better ways to install scripts. There are better ways to use GitHub. The advice that he got was not good, right? We can all agree that it's not good. But if an experienced tech person like Linus searches on the web and comes across a solution, whether that's by a user, a forum post, or whatever, and that is one of the solutions that he gets, then that's part of the problem, because you must assume that some other people are going to get that. Now, this was for a specific piece of hardware, so if you imagine all the other people who have this specific piece of hardware might end up with the same solution. There is a problem, right? It's not the end user that is the problem. This is a problem of communication of how to fix something that the user shouldn't even really need to fix. But, I don't think that the comments, you have to take away from the end user in this case. You have to take away from Linus and say, oh, he shouldn't have done it that way. Well, that was the solution he was given. So the problem is in the solution he was given, not in the end user response. I think people should try to take that into account when judging new users when they move over to Linux or any new system, to be honest.
Until my GoXLR loses power for any reason, at which point I will have to pass it through to Windows, reconfigure it in Windows, and then pass it back over to Linux without losing power.
Of course, this solution will be, this could be solved completely with the hardware manufacturers actually just providing first-party support drivers, or if any of those developers are watching, release enough of the code and hardware, firmware, and device IDs and various other stuff to allow the community to help you with it. I mean, Linux users and developers, they contribute so much of their time to developing these open source versions of things out of the love for doing so. So if you give them access, they're going to use it, I promise you. So maybe give them some access to these pieces of hardware and watch what they do with it, and the results might surprise you.
Once I got PAMAC figured out, getting comms going was surprisingly simple. PAMAC is a program with a graphical user interface that functions similarly to the Pacman package manager that you operate in the terminal. At least it does once you find the hidden button in PAMAC to search Snap, Flatpak, and...
This has been one of those things where you need people who design stuff for a living in terms of user experience and design. This is not a good solution. Basically, there is a lot of software, whether you're for or against Snap packages and Flatpak. The fact is, there's a bunch of software on those that are not in the AUR. So, I mean, people need it. You could argue about waiting for it, but people need the software if they're going to use Linux. Otherwise, they're not going to use Linux. Having this option buried under, like, you click on the Manjaro icon, you go to Add Remove Software, and then you have to click on 3 lines at the top to open up like an options panel, and then go to Advanced and click on some boxes to enable those. It's like, come on. Like, I mean, as a programmer or as a developer, sure, cool, you know where it is because you designed it. But from an end user perspective, that is just not good user experience. Most people won't know it's buried there. When I first moved over to Manjaro, I didn't know it was buried there because, it's so different to, say, some other package managers and various other stuff like that. And I moved over and I'm trying to use it as a desktop environment and not use the terminal as much as I can. In some cases, okay, it's quicker for me to just open up the terminal. Yeah, that's because you've got to click about 500 times before you get to the option to do something in the user interface. User experience design is really what Linux needs if we're going to allow more consumers to use it. I feel like this is one of those issues where during installation, maybe this could be a question. Manjaro developers and other developers could also look at this for distributions and say, when you install, you put in your name, you put in your password, maybe put in like an option there, like, okay, do you want to enable only the official repository? And you can enable the community repository and Flatpak and Snap, right? Just mention the plus and negatives of each one. I mean, it's not so hard, I think. That would make it easier for a lot of end users. Otherwise, they'll just assume that there's not that much software on the system when there actually is quite a lot of software on here. So I think Linus is pretty spot on here with this.
I chose the most official looking package, and I was up and running almost immediately once I found the super convenient per application volume mixer in the bottom right corner. But other than that, it works really well, and my first voice call to Luke went completely without a hitch. Or it would have if I'd known that it was starting. Unfortunately, I actually still have not figured out how to get desktop notifications working. I found a guide, but the instructions fell apart almost immediately.
So this is one of those issues where, I mean, my notifications work great, but that doesn't mean that his doesn't. His don't work. End of. People in the comments and stuff are talking like, oh, like his must have changed some setting, blah, blah, blah. The fact is, like, if 100 people install some software and for 10 people it doesn't work, or even for one person it doesn't work, then there's a problem there somewhere. And we cannot have that level of failure rates or inconsistencies with what is hopefully going to be a more public and consumer used environment. This is one of those things where stability and consistency and testing is really, really important. I could see why this would be frustrating. Personally, I try to turn as many notifications off. I just want the ones on I want. I've got too many, if anything. And then Linus has the exact opposite problem.
Discord was an easy install for me. Again, it was just automatically available in Package Manager. That being said, there was certain missing features. Screen sharing across Slack, Teams, and Discord are kind of sketchy at best. They feel less stable, or they're even missing some features here and there. Outside of that, there's even really simple stuff missing every now and then. Like if I download a file in Slack and then try to click the Open Containing Folder button, just nothing happens. And speaking of missing features,
I think that this issue is probably due to maybe installing Slack on a kind of with Snap or Flatpak. Depending on how those are compiled and set up, some programs want access to localized parts of your system, and if it's done in such a way it might not see that because it's kind of contained within that snap. And snap packages are more notorious for this than Flatpak in my experience. But this differs depending on the user. Again, another problem. But I don't think there is an official or even a decent AUR repository supported version of Slack. I know that I use it, and I'm not using a community supported version. I'm using one of the Snap or Flatpak packages. I can't remember now. And I mean, it works fine, but I haven't had to click to link to open a file. So that should be interesting to see if I have the same problem with that.
It definitely wasn't impossible, and it was actually easier than I expected, but due to various bugs, missing features, and incompatible software, it wasn't as simple or clean as doing it on Windows, but I wouldn't say that was enough for it to be a deal breaker.
For me, the bottom line is what you're looking to get out of it. If you're daily driving Linux for game streaming out of a genuine passion for learning more about it, then have at it. Have fun, but just know what you're getting into. PC gaming already requires a certain amount of tinkering. I mean, there's a reason that more people game on consoles. You know, whether it's trying to track down save files in some Vista era folder or forcing an aspect ratio in an INI file. But a Linux gaming PC, it requires all of that crap and then another mountain of crap on top of it. The good news, though, is that a shocking number of experiences don't start and end with, sorry, you can't do this. So stay tuned for part 3, where Luke and I are going to be trying to get as...
This is an interesting challenge in itself, and Luke's take on this was very good at the end there. Like an expectation of stuff to go wrong, that it went smoother than he expected, and that's someone who has used Linux more than Linus, for example. Linus saying that things are not as smooth as they should be. It's not. I've run into little issues here and there. I'm a more experienced user, so I can get around fixing stuff, but if we're quantifying this on how easy it is for a consumer, which I think this is what Linus's challenge is really trying to get at, it's not. There's some things that are not there yet. It's not as fully featured as Windows for some of the software. I think that that's kind of the point. We need these companies to get behind this. Hopefully, Linus's challenge and the popularity of his videos will mean that some other developers will look at this, because actually, if you look at this, there is a few failings there from Linux itself with various interface design and stuff like that. I think that the majority of the issues that he faces, him and Luke, and actually most people who switch to Linux face, is first-party support. And the fault of that is the companies that do not provide the hardware and the software necessary to allow people to switch over, and do not provide enough files for the community developers to at least make a Linux version. If the companies don't want to spend money on making software, then they can release enough of the files to allow the community to make the software so that Linux users will still buy their hardware. That's my take on that. I'm sure that I've upset some people in this video. I'm sure that some people agree with some stuff in this video. I don't know about this format. I just really wanted to chime in here because I know how the Linux community can be. I really enjoy Linus's videos and that channel, and his take on this has been interesting, and the fact that he's run into issues, especially some serious ones, shows that there's still some room for improvement there. And I love Linux. I've really pushed this onto a lot of my students and other people, and because I love Linux, I want more people to use it, because the more people that use it means it's better for us as Linux users, because we're going to get more hardware, we're going to get more software support, we're going to get a lot more drivers, and that's awesome. And that's what I'm about in my evangelism of Linux. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do leave a comment down below about what you think, if there are any points here that I missed, and let me know if you want me to do any more of these kind of videos. Then just leave a comment down below about that. If you liked the video, press like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That will make me quite happy. Let's see how many subscribers we can get to before we reach Christmas. That will be interesting to find out. This has been an interesting journey so far. I will see you in the next video.